WMI and CIM Associations. In WMI and CIM, associations are a way for two classes or more to relate to each other. For example, a single network adapter can have multiple configurations associated with it. And so the two classes, the one that represents the network adapter and the one that represents its configuration, have to associate with each other. Services are another good example. Services often have other services that they're dependent upon. And so that association connects the two service instances to each other in a way that WMI can understand. In this nugget, we'll talk about how to work with those associations, how to query them out of the repository, and view their information in Windows PowerShell. I'm going to try and keep this nugget pretty concise, so we'll start with a quick look at what associations are, and then I'll give you some examples of querying them using both the WMI command set and the CIM command set. The CIM commands in particular provide a little bit more easily approachable way of doing the querying. When we start working with WMI, you'll see that we're primarily going to be relying on WMI query language because the commands themselves don't have any specific associations functionality. I think one of the easiest ways to understand associations in WMI is by looking at some example documentation. I've pulled up two main WMI classes here. Win32 account, which is an abstract WMI class. Now, in reality, you would normally work with something like Win32 user account or Win32 computer account. Win32 account is kind of the generic basis for those. So that's the first one over here. The second one is Win32 group. Now, let's just pull back from this WMI stuff and the documentation for a second and think about what we're talking about. Groups contain accounts, and that's a pretty straightforward concept. A group can contain user accounts, it can contain computer accounts. Well, an association is a way of WMI recognizing that relationship. And specifically, sitting here in the middle, we've got the Win32 group user class. This class, its instances, connect an account to a group. So you'll see here in this Win32 group user class definition right here that each instance of this points to a group and to an account, meaning that account lives in that group. So you'll have one instance of this associator class or association class, which is what they're called. You'll have an instance of that for every account that belongs to a group. And then it references the group that the thing belongs to and the account that does the belonging. Now, querying these can be a little bit trickier. The language for querying associations is quite complicated. Now, before I dive completely into that, I want to say that it's not my goal here to provide a complete and exhaustive look at WMI associations. It's a topic all of its own. I will, however, recommend a book to you, WMI and PowerShell. Or maybe it's PowerShell and WMI. You can find it at manning.com, and it's written by Richard Sidaway. Really, really good book. Covers associations in a little bit more detail as well as the language that's going to be involved. So if this is something that you really need to dive into, that's a great place to go for more information. I'm going to show you some basic practical examples, ones that you're more likely to use more frequently in a production environment. Just know that there's a lot more exploration of this topic that you can do on your own if you want to. We'll start using the WMI commands. Now, these are available in PowerShell version 2 and later, so I'll do this on my Windows 7 computer. Rather than working with users and groups, I'm going to work with network adapters, and there's a reason for that and a caution that I need to offer to you. In a domain-joined computer, the Win32 user account and Win32 account classes includes all the domain accounts, and Win32 group would include all the group accounts. So if I was to ask my system to enumerate all the users that belong to every group, it could literally take hours to complete, particularly in a large domain. Sticking with network adapters, on the other hand, allows me to be a little bit more scoped in. Now, the first thing I want to do is just a simple get WMI object class Win32 network adapter. I need to find the adapter that represents my actual Ethernet adapter. And I might have, here we are. Here it is right here, my Ethernet adapter. So it's device ID 11. And that's going to be important. Though there's a couple of ways that you can work with associations in WMI. And the first is to get a list of classes that refer to this one. So get WMI object. And here's where we're going to have to start with the Windows Management Instrumentation Query Language, or WQL, or WCL, some folks will call it. This goes in as a string because the WMI object command doesn't have a parameter-based way of executing this query. So I'm going to ask it for references of. You'll notice that unlike a lot of WMI queries you may have seen, this one does not start with the keyword select. I'm asking it to give me other class definitions. So references of what? Well, in curly brackets, I'm going to give it an object path, the thing that I want references to. So Win32 network adapter was my class that I queried, and I want the one whose device ID equals 11. Now that's a lot of information. One way I can narrow that down is to say, just give me the class names. Another way is to actually modify my WCL query so that it only includes the class definitions. And there's a way to do that. There's actually a where clause that you can throw into this thing that will allow you to narrow down the results you get back. And I'll narrow it down by saying, rather than giving me the entire class, I want where class defs, yes, only. Now I get a much, much shorter list. So I can see I've got 4 different classes that are referring to this particular instance of Win32 network adapter. PNP device, or plug and play, network adapter setting, I assume that's the settings that go with that particular network adapter, system devices, and protocol binding. You'll notice that system devices in particular is an associator class because it has that same group component and part component as the Win32 group user class that we looked at in the documentation. So now that I know what classes are referring to, I can query one of them. And again, we'll have to use a query for this. And this time, instead of a references of, I'll do associators of, and I always spell that wrong, so I have to take associators. Yep, okay. Associators of what? And again, I'm going to give this an object path, Win32 network adapter, device ID equals 11. Okay, but I need to be a little bit more specific now. What class is it that I want to look at? Well, where the result class is Win32 network adapter configuration. So let's look at this for just a second. Let's kind of talk about what I think will happen, what I hope will happen. I'm asking this to give me the associators for a particular class and actually a specific instance of that where the device ID is 11. The only results I want are the ones where the resulting class is a Win32 network adapter setting. And I just realized before I hit enter that I actually typed configuration instead, but that's okay because network adapter configuration actually inherits from network adapter setting. I think this will work. Yeah, it didn't. So now we have to start troubleshooting. What's likely going on here is my device ID 11 doesn't have any configurations attached to it. So I need to go back and look at my list of network adapters. There we go, Win32 network adapter, and see if maybe I have another Ethernet adapter aside from number 11. Ah, I do. So that means this machine has got 2 Ethernet adapters, only one of which appears to have a configuration attached. Let's repeat my query there. Defs only, there we are. Nope. Class defs only, here we go. Instead of 11, let's see if we can get the associators for number 7. Nope, still nothing. Well, again, a little bit of troubleshooting is going to be in order. I actually wanted to make sure I showed you this error message because the solution to this is going to drive you nuts. Let's pull the command back up. See, all I did is I removed the spaces, and now it's happy with the device path. I want to try this again with 11 because that's my other Ethernet adapter. Yeah, and now it works fine. So what you're looking at here are the network adapter configurations for my first network card, ID 7, and my second network card, ID 11. This second one does not have DHCP enabled. It's been given this IP address and that IPv6 address. The first one does have DHCP enabled, has that IP address and that IPv6 address. And yes, boys and girls, it is that picky about spaces. And where I think it really gets picky, let's experiment a little bit. Let's try throwing some spaces in on the equal sign. Yep, doesn't work. Yeah, it just does not like spaces in there at all. Sometimes if you're working with non-numeric data, you'll need to delimit the value in single quotes. That should also work even if the data is numeric, and you might even just want to get in the habit of doing it that way. This is one of the reasons I really kind of cringe when I have to work with these associators queries, because the syntax is just physically very picky, and there's actually no examples in the help file for get WMI object that show you this. But what I've done here is I've found a couple of network adapters, and I want to find their network adapter configuration. So I've asked WMI to, look, go get the network adapter configuration that is associated with this instance of Win32 network adapter. Now, keep in mind, the display of this is the standard Win32 network adapter configuration output. That's what you're looking at right there. I can still pipe that to something like format list star to see all of its properties. So the output of the class is still the normal default output. Pipe this to get member. We'll see that this is an instance of Win32 network adapter configuration, and there's a whole bunch of methods in here you can use. Disable DHCP, enable DHCP, a lot of properties you can play with. So the output of this query is a standard Win32 network adapter configuration class. It's just the specific instance that is associated with this instance of Win32 network adapter. So that's one of the useful purposes of these association queries, is being able to unravel some of the connections between these different classes in WMI. All of those techniques will still work here in Windows 8 in PowerShell version 3, but the CIM commands give us some new techniques for working with associations. I'm just going to run all of this against my local computer, but keep in mind that the CIM commands all do provide a computer name and a CIM session parameter so that you could run these against a remote computer. Let's start by retrieving get CIM instance class Win32 logical disk. And I'm going to store this in a variable called disks. But rather than retrieving everything, I'm going to ask it to only get me the key. The key is what's used to relate this class to another class. So by only storing the key, I'm setting myself up to make an association query next. Now let's take a look at what's in disks. There's a lot of information in there. You'll notice that all the properties are there, but only the device ID is actually filled in because that's the key. That's the one I asked for. So let's do this. Let's pipe that through select and just grab device ID so we can see everything on the screen at once. And this is telling me that my local hard disk is probably in disks 1. Let's just look at the device ID. Yep, that's C. That's my local disk. Now that's going to have some relationships to other classes in the system. Get CIM associated instance for my C drive. So I'm going to give it that as my input object. So this is the basis of my association. And I want the Win32 disk partition result class. So this is giving me a list of partitions on that logical disk. So this is telling me that that logical disk is on disk number 0, and if we expand this out, let's pipe it to format list star So we can see all the information. It's located on disk number 0, partition 1. That's where this logical disk comes from. So it's, again, a neat way of just pulling out different bits of information. Let's look at another example. Services, I'm going to grab this time, get sim instance, where the class name is, let's go with bits. Oops, class name is Win32 service. The filter name equals bits. Is that what went in there? Good. Now let's try for dependent services. Get sim associated instance. The input object is going to be the service that I just queried, and the association I want is on Win32 dependent service. So this tells me that bits is dependent on RPC and the event system. So you can sort of walk that tree that way. So there's different associations that come into play, and the one I'm after here is dependent services. As opposed to services that depend upon bits, and I'm not even sure there are any, this is showing me the services that bits depends upon. Now there's another way you can see this. If we just look at that S and pipe it to FL star, we should have a little bit of dependency information displayed in here. Let's see. Share process, description, blah, blah, blah. Nope, it's not giving us to it here, so we would have to have queried that. Now, I want to highlight a difference here. Get WMI object. We're going to do the same class, Win32 service, and I'm going to put the same filter, name equals bits, and we're going to pipe that to FL star as well. WMI does give you a little bit more information. We'll scroll up a bit. Getting all these system classes here, for example, to start with. And then up near the top, we're getting more information about what the different relationships are, where it derives from. So again, just to kind of emphasize that the information presented by these commands are a little bit different. With the CIM commands, you're kind of getting a more modern look at the repository, I guess you could say. You're going to need to use additional commands, and that's why we have the additional commands to kind of explore relationships. So as a quick wrap up, let's take a look at those commands. Get sim class, again, is going to get me a class definition. You saw me use get sim instance to retrieve a particular instance of a class or multiple instances. And then associated instance, once you have an instance, we'll go and get the associations for you. So a little bit different way of working with it. In WMI, you're going to be firing off those WCL queries, whereas in CIM, you get some commands that have a more built-in knowledge of those associations and the ability to make the querying of them just a little bit easier, perhaps. So that's a quick overview of what WMI associations actually are. They're usually a class, B, that relates to other classes, A and C, although in something like a service, you might actually have one class relating back to itself, such as dependent services. And I've given you some examples of querying associations using both the WMI command set and the CIM command set. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.